Consistency in trading does not come from becoming more skilled. It comes from becoming someone different. Most traders think they are chasing profitability. They're not. They are slowly being forced to confront parts of themselves that cannot survive in uncertainty. And until those parts dissolve, consistency will never appear. Not because your strategy is weak, not because your risk management is wrong, not because you lack knowledge, but because the version of you executing the trades is still unstable. Consistency is not a trading milestone. It is a personality reconstruction. And most traders don't fail because they lack skill. They fail because they refuse to let their old self die. If you are wondering whether you are close to consistency, don't ask, "Am I profitable yet?" Ask yourself something much more uncomfortable. Do I still need trading to feel something? Do I still need a winning day to feel competent? Do I still use outcomes to decide who I am? Because profitability often appears after those needs disappear, not before. In my 7 years in the market, I stopped looking at consistency as a performance level. I started seeing it as identity filtration. Certain traits cannot coexist with long-term profitability. Urgency, ego validation, emotional regulation through risk, outcome-based self-worth. And if those traits are still active, no system will save you. Let me explain what actually changes. When a trader stops trying to become consistent and starts becoming structurally different. Sign 1. You stop using trading to feel significant. The first trait that has to dissolve is not lack of skill. It's emotional dependency. Early in my trading journey, I thought I was trying to make money. I wasn't. I was trying to feel important. That sounds harsh, but it's true. Every trade carried weight, not because of capital, but because of what it represented. If it won, I was progressing. If it lost, I was behind. Each trade became a verdict, not on the market, on me. At that stage, I wasn't executing setups. I was collecting evidence. Evidence that I was improving. I wasn't wasting years. I was different from failing traders. I had finally figured something out. And when a trade carries that burden, objectivity disappears. You don't interfere because you lack discipline. You interfere because the trade feels personal. You don't overmanage because you're greedy. You overmanage because you can't tolerate what the trade might imply about you. That's not technical weakness. That's identity attachment. There's something subtle most traders won't admit. Trading gives emotional intensity, anticipation, hope, fear, relief, redemption. For many people, especially those who are ambitious, this intensity feels meaningful. Flat days feel empty. No trades feel unproductive. Waiting feels like falling behind. So they trade, not because opportunity is clear, but because stillness feels threatening. That's when you realize you are not trading the market. You are trading your need to feel engaged. There was a period in my 4th year where something strange happened. I stopped feeling urgency. At first, I thought I was losing passion. But I wasn't. I was losing emotional dependency. Trades stopped feeling symbolic. They stopped representing progress. They became mechanical samples. Just one outcome in a long distribution curve. No meaning attached. That shift was not exciting. It was quiet and slightly uncomfortable because trading no longer gave me emotional specs. It gave me structure. Most traders subconsciously rely on trading to regulate boredom, insecurity, ambition, self-doubt. When you remove that function, trading becomes ordinary, and ordinary feels disappointing. If you entered the market seeking transformation, but consistency requires emotional neutrality. You cannot build stable execution if your nervous system is using trades to feel alive. That's why this shift is hard. When this shift happens, you notice you don't need to be in a trade to feel productive. You don't rush marginal setups to make the day count. You don't need a win to feel competent. You don't carry losses into your self-image. A trade is no longer a mirror. It's a task, and that difference changes everything. Consistency begins when trading stops being emotional fuel, when you no longer need it to prove something, fix something, accelerate something, redeem something. You execute because it aligns, not because it validates. And once validation leaves the equation, interference decreases dramatically, because nothing personal is at stake. If you're watching this and thinking, "I don't trade emotionally," look deeper. Do you feel restless when flat? Do you check your P and L more than your execution? Do you feel subtly deflated after red days? That's not weakness. That's dependency. And dependency cannot coexist with consistency. Once trading stops regulating your emotions, something else becomes visible. You start noticing that your idea of discipline was flawed. Because most traders don't lack discipline. They misunderstand what discipline actually is. And that leads to the second structural shift. Sign 2. You stop mistaking discipline for willpower. After emotional dependency fades, another illusion becomes visible. Most traders believe they lack discipline. They don't. They lack structural constraints. In my early years, I thought discipline meant strength, resisting urges, fighting impulses, forcing myself to behave. That approach works temporarily, but willpower is unstable. It fluctuates with sleep, stress, recent results, personal life, even diet. If your trading stability depends on daily emotional strength, it will collapse eventually. And when it collapses, you'll blame yourself, not the design. There's something seductive about believing discipline is a character trait. It makes you feel responsible, capable, in control. But that belief is also ego-driven. Because if discipline equals strength, then inconsistency equals weakness. And no one likes feeling weak. So traders try harder. They promise themselves, tomorrow I'll be more focused. I just need to control myself better. I won't make that mistake again. But nothing structural changes. So behavior repeats. Not because you lack integrity, but because the environment still allows deviation. There is structural shift. Consistency began forming when I stopped trying to be strong and started trying to be limited. That sounds counterintuitive, but limitations create stability. Instead of increasing freedom, I reduced optionality. One instrument, one time frame, one session, fixed risk, fixed maximum trades per day, predefined invalidation levels before entry. Not because I couldn't handle complexity, but because I understood something. The more variables you allow, the more emotional entry points exist. Consistency is built by reducing decision surface area, not by expanding flexibility. Why most traders resist this? Because constraints feel restrictive, and ambitious people hate restriction, especially in trading, where freedom is part of the appeal. Why limit myself? Why not adapt? Why not stay flexible? Flexibility sounds intelligent, but in unstable hands, flexibility becomes justification. You slightly adjust entry. You slightly widen stop. You slightly add size. Each adjustment feels small, but accumulation of small emotional adjustments destroys structural integrity. Discipline is not what you think. Discipline is not forcing yourself to follow rules. It is designing rules that are hard to break. When structure is clear, entries are binary, risk is predefined, session duration is fixed, max exposure is capped, then discipline becomes maintenance, not struggle. This is when trading becomes boring, because there's nothing to negotiate, and negotiation is where inconsistency lives. The moment you stop proving your discipline and start building systems that remove temptation, your stress decreases. You don't fight yourself. You don't feel heroic for following rules. You just execute. That's professionalism. Professionals don't rely on mood. They rely on process architecture. So what this sign looks like in reality. You notice. You rarely debate with yourself before entry. You don't invent exceptions. You don't reinterpret rules mid-trade. You don't need motivation to execute. Your system doesn't expand with confidence. It doesn't shrink with fear. It remains stable. And that stability creates emotional calm, because your brain no longer needs to evaluate everything constantly. When structure replaces willpower, fatigue decreases. Decision quality becomes consistent across days. And ironically, you feel more free, because freedom without structure is chaos. But structure creates controlled space, and controlled space allows longevity. Once emotional dependency dissolves, and discipline becomes structural instead of emotional, another change happens. You stop chasing confidence, because you realize something uncomfortable. Confidence is not required for execution, and that realization transforms how you show up in the market. Let's talk about that. Sign 3. You stop trying to feel confident before you act. This one is subtle and dangerous, because confidence feels necessary. Early in trading, I believed something that almost everyone believes. I need to feel confident before I execute. If I hesitated, I waited. If I felt unsure, I skipped. If I felt strong, I sized up. Confidence became the green light. But confidence is emotional weather. And emotional weather changes constantly. Confidence often comes from recent wins, clean charts, strong momentum, clear narratives. But what happens when you just had 2 losses? The market looks messy, volatility drops, structure is less obvious. Your system may still be valid, but confidence drops. If confidence controls execution, consistency becomes impossible because you're no longer trading probability. You're trading mood alignment. Confidence is unstable. It expands during winning streaks. It contracts during drawdowns. So what most traders experience is this cycle. Win, feel confident, increase risk, overexpose. Loss, feel uncertain, reduce size, hesitate. Behavior changes. Risk changes. Decision timing changes. Even if the system stays the same, that fluctuation destroys expectancy. Not because the edge disappears, but because the execution baseline keeps shifting. At some point, something clicked for me. Execution does not require confidence. It requires alignment. If conditions match criteria, execution happens, whether I feel strong or not. That shift was uncomfortable, because it meant accepting trades, while feeling neutral, sometimes even slightly uneasy. But that's what probability actually looks like. It doesn't feel powerful. It feels repetitive. Waiting for confidence is a trap. When you wait to feel ready, you create emotional dependency again. You think you're being cautious, but you're actually filtering trades through internal emotion, not structural validity. Confidence becomes a luxury filter, and probability does not reward luxury filter. It rewards consistency. When this sign develops, you notice. You don't size up because you feel good. You don't hesitate because of recent losses. You don't delay entries waiting for extra confirmation. You don't interpret uncertainty as danger. You execute because the setup qualifies, not because you feel certain. Certainty is a myth in markets. Structure is not. You begin to understand something critical. Confidence is an outcome of repetition, not a prerequisite for action. If you wait for emotional reassurance, you will always be inconsistent. If you rely on structural validation, you can operate under uncertainty. That is a different level of psychological development. When this stage forms, your trading feels less dramatic. No rush. No hype. No, this is the one. Just another execution. Some traders misinterpret this as losing edge. It's not. It's losing emotional volatility. And emotional volatility is what makes early trading feel intense. Consistency feels less intense, but far more stable. Confidence belongs to ego. Alignment belongs to process. When ego leads, size fluctuates. Behavior fluctuates. Expectations fluctuate. When process leads, execution stabilizes. And stabilized execution is the only environment where consistency can grow. Once confidence stops controlling execution, you begin noticing something else. You become more sensitive to internal deterioration, not dramatic breakdowns, subtle tension. And that's when real maturity appears. Because consistent traders don't wait for losses to force adjustment. They reduce risk before damage happens. Let's go there next. Sign 4. You reduce risk before emotion forces you to. Most traders reduce risk after damage. Consistent traders reduce risk before deterioration. That difference is enormous. Early in my journey, risk reduction was reactive. After a bad day, after a losing streak, after frustration became obvious. By that time, it was already too late. The capital loss was visible, but the more important loss had already happened. Clarity. Emotional breakdown in trading is rarely dramatic. It builds quietly. You don't wake up reckless. It starts with slight irritation after a stop loss, slight urgency to recover, slight attachment to the next setup, slight narrowing of patience. Each one feels manageable, but they compound, and by the time you notice, you're already executing differently. Not wildly, just subtly worse. And subtle degradation repeated destroys accounts slowly. In my early years, I believed risk rules were enough. I had fixed percent risk, daily loss cap, max positions. I thought that meant I was safe. But I wasn't washing internal exposure. I was washing numerical exposure. There were days where technically I followed rules, but emotionally I was overloaded. Those days always ended worse than they started. Not because the system failed, but because I was no longer neutral. The shift happened when I stopped asking, "How much have I lost?" and started asking, "How clean is my thinking right now?" That question changed everything. Because sometimes the answer was, "Not very clean." And that was enough to reduce size. Or stop. Not because of fear, but because of respect. Respect for how fragile decision quality becomes once emotional noise increases. Consistent traders don't reduce risk because they are scared. They reduce risk because they are aware. There is a difference. Fear-based reduction says, "I don't trust myself anymore." Awareness-based reduction says, "I recognize early-stage degradation." That's not weakness. That's professionalism. What this looks like practically. You notice, after two emotionally intense trades, you step back. After a frustrating session, you cut size the next day. After a strong winning streak, you resist increasing risk impulsively. When focus drops, you end early. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because you sense drift. Most traders only react to catastrophe. Consistent traders respond to drift. This stage comes late. You cannot reduce risk early if you don't yet recognize your own emotional patterns. That recognition only comes after. Trades stop feeling personal. Discipline becomes structural. Confidence becomes irrelevant. At this point, you're no longer fighting the market. You're managing yourself. That's a different game entirely. When you intervene early, you prevent cascade. Most accounts don't explode in one decision. They degrade in sequences. Early risk reduction breaks the sequence. And once sequences stop compounding, equity stabilizes. Risk management is not about protecting capital. It's about protecting clarity. Capital can recover. Clarity once lost takes time. And time in markets is expensive. Once you stop trading for emotion, build structural discipline, detach from confidence, and regulate risk early, there is one final shift left. The most difficult one, because it challenges identity directly. Consistency fully forms only when your sense of self separates from your P and L. And that's where we go next. Sign 5. You separate your identity from your P and L. This is the final shift. Not because it's advanced technically, but because it's psychologically destabilizing. For most traders, P and L is never just a number. It's evaluation. It's feedback. It's identity confirmation. A green day feels like competence. A red day feels like regression. And over time, without realizing it, your self-worth starts syncing with your equity curve. That's where inconsistency lives. In the beginning, trading feels exciting. Then it feels important. Eventually, it feels personal. Wins don't just feel profitable. They feel validating. Losses don't just feel negative. They feel exposing. You don't just experience outcomes. You interpret them. A red week becomes, maybe I'm not progressing. Maybe I'm falling behind. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. That internal dialogue is not harmless. It changes behavior. When identity is involved, execution can never stay neutral. When P and L affects identity, you don't just want the trade to work. You need it to work. And that need creates distortion. You hold losers longer, because closing them feels like admitting weakness. You cut winners early, because you want to secure validation. You revenge trade, because you want to restore self-image. You hesitate, because you don't want another hit to confidence. All of this happens subtly. You won't call it ego. You'll call it being serious. But seriousness is not the problem. Attachment is. There was a time when a red week could ruin my mood. Not visibly, but internally. I'd think about it at night. Recalculate scenarios. Replay entries. Question myself. The market wasn't open anymore. But mentally, I was still trading. That's when I realized something critical. I wasn't protecting capital. I was protecting identity. And identity is fragile. Capital is not. The shift didn't happen overnight. It came after enough cycle. Enough wins that meant nothing long-term. Enough losses that didn't define me. Eventually, something recalibrated. P and L became data, not judgment. Green didn't inflate me. Red didn't shrink me. Both became information. That's emotional independence. And emotional independence is the final gate to consistency. What this looks like practically. When this stage forms, you don't check your P and L compulsively. You don't feel the urge to talk about big wins. You don't hide from losses. You don't change behavior based on recent performance. Your identity stops fluctuating with short-term variance. And once identity stabilizes, behavior stabilizes. And once behavior stabilizes, results compound. Ironically, when you stop using trading to validate yourself, you trade better. Because nothing is at stake psychologically. There is no need to prove, no need to defend, no need to recover image. Just execution, probability, repetition. That's it. Because this stage feels empty. Trading loses drama. It loses narrative. It loses emotional intensity. And many traders entered the market precisely for that intensity. Letting go of identity attachment feels like losing meaning. But what replaces it is something more powerful: stability. And stability compounds quietly. Look at the full arc. You stop using trading to regulate emotion. You build structure instead of relying on willpower. You execute without needing confidence. You reduce risk before damage forces you. You detach identity from outcome. At that point, consistency is no longer a goal. It's a byproduct. You didn't become consistent. You removed the parts of yourself that made inconsistency inevitable. That's why consistency is not a strategy. It's a reconstruction. And reconstruction is slow, uncomfortable, and invisible to others. But once it's complete, trading stops feeling like survival. It starts feeling like work. And that's when longevity becomes possible.